I was asleep. And I get a call, and I wake up, and
It was just a phone call. That's what makes it so hard to let go of, even now, almost 50 years later. Just a regular phone call between two guys who'd known each other since they were teenagers running around Memphis with nothing but time and big dreams and a whole lot of loyalty between them. Jerry Schilling picked up the phone. Elvis was on the other end. And Elvis, the Elvis on that call, sounded good. He was laughing, cracking jokes the way he always did, that warm southern thunder in his voice, that charm that didn't feel performed because for Jerry, it never was. This wasn't the Elvis the world saw on stage, bloated and struggling through a set in some mid-tier arena town. This was the Elvis that Jerry had known since 1954. The real one, the one who existed before the legend swallowed the man whole. That phone call happened roughly 36 hours before everything ended. And that's the thing about tragedy that no one ever really prepares you for. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you a dramatic score or a slow-motion warning. It shows up disguised as a Tuesday. It shows up disguised as a phone call where your best friend sounds fine, where he's laughing, where he's talking about the upcoming tour, where everything feels normal enough that you hang up and go about your day and don't think twice about it. Because why would you? Because that's what normal feels like right before it disappears forever. Jerry Schilling has spent decades living with that phone call, turning it over, listening to it again in his memory, searching for the thing he missed. The crack in Elvis's voice, the pause that lasted a beat too long, some signal, something that should have told him what was coming. He never finds it, because it wasn't there. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand who Jerry Schilling actually is. Because the media loves to use the phrase Elvis's inner circle like it's a monolith, like all those Memphis boys were interchangeable accessories to the king's mythology. They weren't, and Jerry was different. He wasn't hired. He wasn't a handler or a hanger-on or somebody chasing proximity to fame. Jerry Schilling met Elvis Presley when Jerry was just a kid, 15 years old, playing a sandlot football game in North Memphis. Elvis was 20, and something clicked between them the way things only click when you're young enough to still be forming who you are. A friendship that doesn't have an agenda because neither of you is famous yet. A friendship that's just real. Jerry would go on to build his own career. Music industry executive, worked with the Beach Boys, managed Billy Joel. He didn't need Elvis's orbit to have a life. He chose to stay in it because that's what you do with people you genuinely love. And that mutual respect, that non-transactional asterisk love between them, is exactly why what Jerry carries about those final days is so much heavier than what anyone else has said publicly. He wasn't protecting a meal ticket. He was mourning a brother. So when Jerry talks about the weeks leading up to August 16th, 1977, when he pulls back the curtain just slightly, carefully, with the kind of measured honesty that only comes from someone who has spent years deciding exactly how much truth the world deserves, you listen differently. You understand that every word is chosen, that the silence around certain words is chosen too. And what does that picture look like? The real one underneath the tabloid wreckage. It looks like exhaustion. It looks like a 42-year-old man whose body had been running on the wrong kind of fuel for years. Prescription medications stacked on top of each other like a house of cards, each one prescribed to counteract the side effects of the last. It looks like a man who hadn't had a full night of natural sleep in longer than anyone around him could accurately remember. A man whose world had shrunk, paradoxically, as his fame had grown, until Graceland, that beautiful, ridiculous, gilded mansion on the hill, had become less of a home and more of a fortress he couldn't leave without it becoming an event. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. Elvis Presley, the man who electrified the entire planet, who didn't just change music but rewired an entire generation's understanding of what a human body could do on a stage, couldn't walk to the end of his own driveway without a security detail and a crowd waiting to consume him. He was, in the most literal sense, a prisoner of the thing he'd built, the thing that had been built around him. And the people who loved him, genuinely loved him, Jerry included, were caught in an impossible position. Because how do you tell Elvis Presley to slow down? How do you look the king in the eye and say this is killing you when the king himself refuses to see it, when the machine around him depends on him not seeing it, when every single person in that circle has their own complicated reasons for keeping the engine running. That guilt doesn't go away, not in 50 years, not ever. In the final weeks of his life, people close to Elvis started noticing something, not a dramatic deterioration, nothing that would make the evening news, something quieter than that, something in the way he talked about things. He'd make a reference to the future and then trail off, like a sentence that starts confident and loses its footing halfway through. He'd talk about things he wanted to do, places he'd never been, music he still wanted to make. But there was a quality to it that felt less like planning and more like wishing. Like a man describing a country he wasn't sure he'd ever visit. Jerry noticed it. Others noticed it. Nobody said it out loud, because saying it out loud makes it real, and none of them were ready to make it real. Elvis was also preparing for a tour, scheduled to fly out on the night of August 16th, the very night he died. There were tickets sold, venues booked, fans already counting down the days. Elvis, for all his physical decline, was still showing up, still putting on the suit, still doing the thing that was the only thing he'd ever known how to do since he was a teenager with a guitar and an impossible amount of natural magnetism. There's something almost unbearably sad about that. The man was still trying. Right up until the end, he was still trying to be what the world needed him to be, even as what the world needed him to be was quietly destroying him. That's the detail that never makes it into the simple version of this story. The one where Elvis is just another casualty of rock and roll excess, a cautionary tale to be filed away between Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin. That version is clean. It's easy. It lets everybody off the hook. The real version is messier. The real version involves love and blindness and loyalty and failure all tangled together in a way that can't be neatly resolved. And then, on the afternoon of August 16th, 1977, a phone call goes out from Graceland. Different kind of call this time. The Memphis summer is brutal that day, the air thick and heavy the way it gets in the South when the heat has nowhere to go. And somewhere inside that mansion, something has gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. The voice on the other end of that call doesn't sound panicked. It sounds resigned. Like somewhere, on some level that nobody had ever been brave enough to say out loud, this had always been a question of when, not if. And Jerry Schilling, the kid from North Memphis, the 15-year-old who played football with a 20-year-old named Elvis on a summer afternoon in 1954, gets the news. But what he found when he got to Graceland that day, what he saw, what he was told, what he was not told, that wasn't the story the world was given. Not even close. Here's what the official story gives you. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive in his bathroom at Graceland on the afternoon of August 16, 1977. Paramedics were called. Attempts at resuscitation failed. He was pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital at 3:30 p.m. Cause of death, cardiac arrhythmia. Case closed. Legend preserved. Myth intact. That version of events is not a lie exactly, but it is, and this is important, incomplete in ways that matter deeply, because the official story tells you what happened at the very end. What it doesn't tell you is what was happening in the hours and days and weeks before that bathroom. What it doesn't tell you is what life actually looked like inside Graceland leading up to that moment. And when you lay out the real timeline, the actual, documented this is, what was really happening timeline, the cardiac arrhythmia stops feeling like a random tragedy and starts feeling like an inevitable conclusion to a story that had been building for years. Let's go through it, because the details matter, every single one of them. In the final 24 hours of his life, Elvis Presley did not sleep. Not a single hour, not a nap, nothing. He had been awake for approximately 33 straight hours by the time his body finally gave out. 33 hours, running on whatever combination of medications his system had been conditioned to depend on, in a body that was already working far too hard just to maintain basic function. The night of August 15th, he had a dental appointment, 10 o'clock at night, because that's what life looked like for Elvis at that point. The world arranged itself around his schedule, his insomnia, his inability to exist in ordinary daylight hours like an ordinary human being. His dentist came to him at night, the way everything came to Elvis on his terms at his hours, inside the bubble. After the dental appointment, he went back to Graceland and stayed awake through the night. He read. He moved around the house. He did the things that people do when sleep won't come and the house is quiet and there's nothing to do but wait for morning and hope that morning brings something different. It didn't. By the time August 16th arrived, Elvis had been scheduled to fly out that very evening for the start of a new tour. Portland, Maine, first stop. Tickets sold. Fans waiting. The machine already in motion. And Elvis, exhausted and medicated and carrying a body that was failing him in ways that should have been impossible to ignore, was fully intending to get on that plane. That's who Elvis Presley was, even at the end, especially at the end. The show was the one thing that never stopped being real to him, even when almost everything else had become a kind of fog. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable, because we have to talk about the thing that everyone who loved Elvis has spent decades carefully talking around. The medications. By 1977, Elvis was under the care of his personal physician, Dr. George Nishapoulos, known to everyone as Dr. Nick. And the prescription records that would eventually come to light after Elvis's death were, to put it plainly, staggering. In the first 8 months of 1977 alone, Dr. Nick had prescribed Elvis more than 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics. Uppers to get going, downers to come down. Painkillers layered on top of everything else. A pharmaceutical architecture so complex that Elvis's body had essentially stopped being able to regulate itself without chemical intervention. This was not a secret inside Graceland. It couldn't be. The people around Elvis, the Memphis Mafia, the staff, the inner circle, they saw asterisk it. They watched it happen in real time, gradually and then all at once, the way these things always go. They watched a man they loved disappear incrementally into something none of them had the medical vocabulary to fully name, but all of them had the human instinct to recognize as asterisk deeply wrong. And yet, the machine kept running. Why? Because stopping the machine meant confronting Elvis. And confronting Elvis, the real Elvis, the one with the temper and the absolute authority inside his own kingdom, was something almost nobody in that circle was genuinely equipped to do. Not because they were cowards, but because the power dynamic inside Graceland had been calcified over 20 years into something nearly immovable. Elvis didn't receive hard truths well. He surrounded himself over time with people who understood that. And the ones who pushed back too hard, the ones who tried to force the conversation that needed to happen, had a way of finding themselves on the outside looking in. Jerry Schilling understood this. He'd navigated it his entire friendship with Elvis. The careful balance between honesty and loyalty, between saying enough and knowing when saying more would only slam a door. But there's a difference between navigating that balance and being at peace with it. Jerry wasn't there that final morning. He'd been in Lowe's Angels, going about his life the way you do, the way you have to, when the person you love is a force of nature that you cannot control and have long since accepted you cannot save, only accompany, for as long as they'll let you. That absence, the geographical fact of not being in Memphis on August 16th, is something that exists in Jerry Schilling's life as a permanent, unresolvable weight. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated than guilt. The particular grief of someone who loved right, who showed up consistently across decades, and still wasn't in the room when it mattered most. Because nobody was in that room. That's the part that keeps coming back. In the end, Elvis Presley was alone. the most famous human being on the planet, a man who had not been truly alone in years, who could not walk through an airport or eat in a restaurant or exist in public space without being consumed by the world's hunger for him, died by himself on a bathroom floor while the rest of Graceland went on around him. And when the call finally went out, when the alarm finally got raised, the people who came running were already too late. Jerry Schilling got the news in California. And what he was told in those first chaotic hours, what the official version handed to the people closest to Elvis, didn't fully match what Jerry had known in his bones for years. There's what the world was told, and then there's what Jerry Schilling believes. Those two things are not the same, and he's finally starting to say so out loud. There's a version of loyalty that looks like silence. Not the silence of indifference, not the silence of someone who doesn't care or doesn't know. The silence of someone who cares so deeply, who knows so much, that they spend years carefully measuring every word before it leaves their mouth, weighing what the truth costs, weighing who it costs, deciding again and again that some things are better carried privately than handed over to a world that will inevitably mishandle them. That's the silence Jerry Schilling kept for a long time. And then, slowly, through interviews, through his memoir, through the particular honesty that tends to come when a man gets older and realizes that protecting a legacy and telling the truth about a human being are not always the same thing, that silence started to open up. What came out of it wasn't explosive. It wasn't a tell-all. It wasn't the kind of revelation that gets turned into a headline and forgotten by next week. It was something quieter and far more devastating than that. It was clarity. Jerry Schilling's memoir is called Me and a Guy Named Elvis. That title is deliberate. Not me and the king. Not me and a legend. A guy named Elvis. A specific human being with a specific name who existed before the mythology and deserved to be remembered after it. That framing tells you everything about how Jerry has always understood his role in the story, not as a witness to an icon, but as a friend to a man. And the man, according to Jerry, knew. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Not a deathbed confession or a dramatic midnight conversation where Elvis looked into Jerry's eyes and said something poetic about mortality. That's not how real life works, and it's not how Elvis worked. But in the way that people who are quietly losing ground always know, in the pauses, in the way certain topics get avoided, in the vague and drifting quality that starts to creep into conversations about the future. Jerry has spoken about the way Elvis talked in those final months, the way he'd reference things he wanted to do with a softness that felt less like excitement and more like nostalgia for something that hadn't happened yet. The way he could be in a room full of people, laughing, performing, being Elvis, and still somehow seem profoundly, unreachably far away. Elvis Presley, in the last chapter of his life, was lonely in a way that fame not only couldn't fix but had actively created. The very thing that was supposed to be the reward, the adoration, the legend, the untouchable status, had become the walls of his prison. And the cruelest part is that he built those walls himself, one brilliant, earth-shaking performance at a time, until the man inside them had almost no way left to be seen as just a man. Jerry saw him. That's the thing. Through all of it, through the weight gain and the bad nights and the medication fog and the years when Elvis wasn't his best self, Jerry Schilling kept seeing the kid from Memphis, kept holding on to that, kept showing up for that person. And that person, Jerry believes, deserved better than what he got. Let's be precise about what better means here, because this isn't about blame in the simple, satisfying way that true crime narratives usually deliver it. It's not a clean villain. It's not one bad decision or one person who failed Elvis in one specific moment. It's a system, a slow-moving, well-intentioned, catastrophically flawed system of people who loved Elvis and needed Elvis and feared Elvis and enabled Elvis all at the same time. A physician who kept prescribing because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. Managers who kept booking tour because the alternative was an Elvis who stopped performing and nobody knew what that looked like, or if it was even survivable. Friends who bit their tongues because they'd learned, through hard experience, that the truth had a way of costing you your place in his life. And Elvis himself, and this is the part that requires the most care, the most humanity, Elvis himself, who was both victim and participant, who sought out the medications that were killing him because they were the only thing that gave him any relief from the relentless, grinding pressure of being Elvis Presley 24 hours a day, who chose, consciously or not, the comfort of the bubble over the terror of confronting what was happening to him. Jerry doesn't assign blame with a pointing finger. He's too honest for that and too loyal and too aware of his own place inside that same flawed system. But what he does, what he's been doing in every thoughtful interview and every carefully chosen public word for decades, is refuse to let the story flatten out into myth, refuse to let Elvis become only a tragedy or only a legend, insist, quietly and persistently, on the human being underneath both of those things. Elvis Presley died alone on a bathroom floor. Say it plainly because it deserves to be said plainly. Don't dress it up. Don't soften it with legacy language or musical retrospectives or cultural impact assessments. A man, a specific, complicated, gifted, struggling, real man, died alone on a bathroom floor at 42 years old. And the people who loved him most weren't there, couldn't be there, didn't know it was the moment they needed to be there for. Jerry Schilling wasn't there. And if you listen carefully to the way he talks about it, not the words exactly, but the weight behind the words, the thing that lives underneath the careful, measured honesty, you understand that this is the fact he has never fully put down. Not in 50 years. Not in all the interviews and the memoir and the documentaries and the anniversary retrospectives. He wasn't there. And Elvis was alone. And the world was told a version of that day that was technically accurate and emotionally, fundamentally insufficient. The real story, the one Jerry carries, the one that lives in the gaps between what was officially reported and what the people closest to Elvis actually understood, is still not fully told. But here's what almost nobody talks about. What happened in the hours after Elvis was gone, the scramble, the silence, the fracturing of everything that circle of men had built their lives around, revealed something about everyone in that orbit, including the people who claim to love him most. When a king dies, the kingdom doesn't grieve quietly. It fractures. And what happened to the men of the Memphis Mafia in the hours, days, and years after Elvis Presley drew his last breath inside Graceland is a story that almost nobody tells, because the world moved on so fast, so hungry for the mythology of the loss, that the actual human wreckage left behind barely registered. The headlines were about Elvis. The retrospectives were about Elvis. The grief that got airtime was the grief of strangers, the fans weeping outside the gates of Graceland, the radio tributes, the record stores selling out overnight. The grief of the men who actually knew him, that happened in private, in silence, in the particular darkness that descends when the person your entire life has been organized around is suddenly, permanently gone. The Memphis Mafia didn't just lose a friend on August 16, 1977. They lost their purpose. Think about what that inner circle actually was. These weren't men with conventional careers who happened to be friendly with a famous person. For most of them, Elvis wasn't just a friend. He was the center of gravity around which their entire existence had been arranged. Their jobs, their income, their social world, their daily routine, their sense of identity, all of it orbited Elvis. All of it depended on Elvis continuing to exist and continuing to need them. And then in a single afternoon, that gravity just stopped. What do you do with that? How do you rebuild a life when the scaffolding wasn't just removed but obliterated? When the person you were loyal to is gone, and the institution that person represented is now suddenly a estate, a legal entity, a commodity being managed by people who never sat in that living room at Graceland at 2 in the morning eating peanut butter and banana sandwiches and watching Elvis hold court like the king he genuinely was. Some of the Memphis mafia turned to drink. Some disappeared into years of quiet irrelevance. Some tried to monetize the memories in ways that felt, to others in the circle, like a betrayal of everything the Brotherhood had stood for. The fractures that had always existed beneath the surface, the jealousies, the hierarchies, the resentments that accumulate in any group of men who have spent 20 years competing for the approval of one singular, magnetic, impossible human being, those fractures cracked wide open. It wasn't pretty, it was human, which is exactly what the legend of Elvis always tried to prevent anything around him from being. Jerry Schilling navigated it differently. He had always been, in some fundamental way, slightly outside the gravitational pull that consumed the others completely, not because he loved Elvis less, but because he'd maintained enough of his own identity, his own career, his own life outside the orbit, to have something to stand on when the center collapsed. That separateness, which had sometimes created distance between him and the more embedded members of the inner circle, turned out to be the thing that saved him. But saving himself didn't mean escaping the grief. It never does. What Jerry chose to do with his grief, and this is the part that distinguishes him from almost everyone else who came out of that world, was protect the truth of who Elvis actually was. Asterisk, not the caricature, not the jumpsuits and the fried food and the late period excess that the internet loves to reduce him to. The actual person, the musician of staggering instinctive genius, the man of genuine warmth and generosity who would give a stranger the shirt off his back and mean it completely. The complicated, deeply feeling, profoundly lonely human being who happened to be the most famous person on earth and found no peace in that fact whatsoever. Every interview Jerry has given, every word of that memoir, every careful, measured public appearance, all of it has been, at its core, an act of devotion, a refusal to let the world's lazy mythologizing be the final word on a man he knew better than almost anyone alive. That's not a small thing. In a world that monetizes celebrity grief and packages tragedy into content, choosing restraint and accuracy and humanity as your instruments of remembrance is a radical act. Jerry Schilling chose it, and he's kept choosing it for 50 years. So what does Jerry actually want people to understand about those last days? If you strip away everything, the official reports, the documentary footage, the anniversary specials, the conspiracy theories, what is the core truth that the man who knew Elvis best wants to leave behind? It's this. Elvis Presley was not destroyed by Hollywood. He was not simply a victim of the 1970s prescription drug culture, though that culture absolutely killed him. He was not brought down by greed or mismanagement or any single failure of any single person, though there were failures, real and serious and worth reckoning with honestly. Elvis Presley was a human being who needed help and did not know how to ask for it, who had spent so many years being everything to everyone, the savior of popular music, the engine of an industry, the fantasy of millions, the provider for an entire community of people who depended on him, that the simple, ordinary, desperately human act of saying, "I am not okay," had become almost physiologically impossible for him. He needed someone to see through the performance, to look past the king and find the man and say, loudly, clearly, without fear of the consequences, "This has to stop." Maybe that person existed. Maybe more than one person tried, in their own imperfect way, to be that voice. But the machine was too loud, and Elvis was too far inside it. And on a hot August afternoon in Memphis, the cost of all of it came due. Jerry Schilling outlived the king by nearly 5 decades, and every interview, every public word, every carefully chosen act of remembrance across all those years has been, in some essential way, an attempt to give Elvis back the one thing that fame stole from him completely: his humanity. Whether the world is ready to receive it, to hold it carefully, to sit with the discomfort of a legend who was also just a man, that remains, as it always has, an open question. But Jerry keeps offering it anyway, because that's what you do for someone you love, even after they're gone, especially after they're gone. If this story moved you, if it changed even slightly the way you think about Elvis, about fame, about what we ask of the people we turn into legends, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more untold stories from the people who were actually in the room. And tell us in the comments, what do you think fame really cost Elvis Presley?